Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is the weekly podcast for all your tillage news and advice. In this episode, I'll be discussing safe use of machinery and other hazards around tillage farms with Francis Blight, farm safety specialist in Teagasc. I first asked Francis about farm deaths and injuries to date.
We've had a number of fatalities so far this year. Unfortunately, 12 people have lost their lives, and this comes after 19 people that lost their lives in 2019. So I suppose over the last 10 years, the main places that are the main areas that are causing the fatalities are tractors, vehicles and machinery accounting for 50%. Falls from heights account for 9%, falling objects 8%, and then the animals, the fatalities associated with animals, they account for 19% of deaths. So they're a big area that we need to work on to try and get those figures down. Then drowning, gas, and timber related make up the rest.
Okay, but sounds like an awful lot to do with tractors and vehicles and that kind of thing. So does that mean that there's tillage farmers and a tillage farm is a very unsafe to be on, considering that they have most of the machinery?
Yes, well, I suppose the National Farm Survey of 2012-2017 would show that tillage enterprises, they recorded 12% of the accidents, with dairy farmers accounting for 18%, sheep 11%, and then the animal-related enterprises 17%. So tillage farmers wouldn't be seen as the most dangerous areas. Largely, tillage farmers are doing very well in relation to managing safety on their farms, but there is that place there to do better. So 12% needs to be reduced, and that's for accident rates.
And within that 12%, Francis, where are those accidents happening? Is it down to machinery again, or are there other areas where guys should really look at?
So a third, largely, of the accidents on tillage farms are farm vehicles and machinery. 16% of them are from trips and falls, and then a third of them are from livestock. So so we don't have category for the final 28%, but largely machinery has a very large role to play in trying to get those figures down and make those farms a little bit safer.
Okay, and in terms of that machinery, trying to make that area that little bit safer, is it to do with maintaining those machines, or is it to do with safe practice of those machines?
Safe maintenance of those machines and safe practice, it all works together. So if you have a well-organized farm and you're identifying issues that are happening to machinery that where maintenance is required, and that maintenance takes place, that will reduce accidents. We see that well-organized farms that have good practices in place have less problems, have less accidents taking place. Really the main message to take really is that machinery, well-maintained machinery and well-planned jobs, they definitely help to reduce accidents. We look at, I suppose I'm aware of a tillage farmer in a situation where there was a process of attaching a loader bucket to a load-all shovel. When he pulled up beside the bucket, he got down off the machine, he went around the back, and the load-all moved backwards on top and pinned him against the wall. That was an environment where that particular load-all, the handbrake either wasn't applied or it wasn't working effectively. So maintenance has a big impact. If machines are well maintained, they are safer.
Okay, so I suppose we went through a long number of years, I suppose, where we were encouraging farmers to look at their PTO shafts and that kind of thing. Has that area improved pretty much on farms now, or what are you seeing on the ground?
Yes, definitely. People are more. If you ask a group of farmers, to identify the risk areas on farms, most farmers will say to you the PTO shaft and the PTO shaft cover. And farmers are doing better in relation to that. Accident rates for PTO shaft covers have reduced. But the big area that's causing most of the fatalities is crush injuries. So 54% of deaths on on farms associated with tractors, farm vehicles and machinery are crush injuries. And they're simple things, like I said there, where the load all moves back, it wasn't, the handbrake wasn't applied, and the farmer got crushed. Or they're attaching equipment onto the back of a tractor, and it moves back, or it's not been correctly supported, and it moves sideways and crushes the farmer. So small, simple things are happening on farms. And crush injuries, 54% of deaths. So that's a big message there, to make sure things are well secure and that crush injuries don't take place.
Okay. So we're on the run into harvest. Most guys are probably finished, agronomic bits and bobs out in fields, and they're thinking about getting the combines out, getting trailers up and going, and also then they're going to have to find additional drivers for tractors over the harvest period. Do you have any great advice for those farmers, just in terms of bringing in inexperienced drivers onto farms?
Yes, so obviously getting labour and experienced labour is difficult. It might be a little bit easier maybe this harvest with more people available, possibly due to COVID-19 to do this type of work. But generally, it's difficult to get experienced drivers. So it's very important that when farmers and contractors are employing drivers, that they make sure that those individuals are competent to use those machines. So safe operation of large machines, fast tractors, heavy loads, there's a lot going on there, and it's important that these drivers, when they come in, that there's time spent with them is the main thing. There's time spent with them. So there's time spent with them in the yard, going through the various controls, making sure that they know fully how to operate them. And then there's time spent with them on the road, that you're fully sure that they're able to manage these machines in a safe way, and that you're spending time advising them and telling them and encouraging them to operate these machines safely. So it is a big area. You have young people that are coming in that are eager to use these machines, and eager maybe to use them at higher speeds. And what you're trying to do is trying to encourage them to operate them safely, and that takes a bit of time, and it takes a bit of you have to invest time in it to make that happen.
Sure. Back in my day, I think when I was learning how to drive tractors, and I was out on roads, I was only 16, or maybe go towards 17 maybe. But the tractors I was on at the time would look very old, obviously today. But the top speed probably wasn't any more than about 25 or maybe 30 kilometers an hour. You're now looking at tractors at maybe 50 or 60k boxes. They're very fast. They're very big. 150, 200 horsepower tractors. Stick a 20-ton load on top of that. To me, you're converting that tractor into almost a truck. How has the law changed any in terms of putting those inexperienced drivers up there, or are things pretty much the same? But we, our farmers, need to just take that extra responsibility, or what way should a farmer approach that? I know you've kind of said about spending the extra time, but is there other extra things a guy should be trying to do to make sure that a guy slows down? Maybe every young fella has a phone, I suppose, in his hand most of the time. How does a guy really drive it into these young fellas that it's a huge responsibility?
Yeah, in my view, it's all about culture on the farm. From the second they arrive, there's a culture there of safety, and there's a culture there of you're managing this machine, you're responsible for this machine, you're responsible to drive it safely, and we're encouraging you to do that. We're encouraging you to come back safely rather than come back fast. In relation to the legislation has changed a lot in relation to weights and capacities of machines. The licensing is evolving, but it's still a situation where that 16-year-old can get a license to drive that machine. But it isn't the case where me as a farmer, I'm going to allow a person to drive a machine without being fully sure they're competent to do so. So the responsibility is on me as the owner of this machine that's employing a young person to drive it, to make sure that they're doing it appropriately. So that requires supervision. making sure and watching and taking, as I said earlier, taking the time to talk to them and to encourage them to work safely. Obviously, things like driving slowly around the yard, being aware of that. Are they doing that? And checking them if they're not. Driving slowly on narrow roads. They can do, as you said, 50, 60 kilometers an hour, but maybe you're encouraging them to drive at 30 kilometers an hour or less, depending on the type of road that they're on. And that you're encouraging them and you're praising them when you see them doing what you ask them to do. And that you talk to them if they're not doing it. And if they're not taking heed in relation to the mobile phones, and we know of all the issues that have arisen, I suppose, on social media and that with these mobile phones. If that happens, then you have to take corrective action, and you can't have people on machines that are doing things that are unsafe.
Yeah, I think all very wise. I think especially your comment to do with maybe narrow roads. We certainly have a lot more pedestrians, cyclists on the road since the COVID-19. So I suppose these roads, especially rural roads, are busier places nowadays. If we're to maybe come back just a little bit, just in terms of the workshop, obviously it's a big area. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of there's angle grinders, and there's various different tires and heavy machinery kind of going around the place. Is there a number of areas that tillage farmers should be looking at in particular to make sure that the workshop is a safe place?
Yes, well, like the main piece of as advice that I always try and deliver is that the first thing to try and do with a workshop is keep it tidy. So keeping it tidy, making sure that everything has a place, making sure that you have your safety equipment there in relation to the first aid boxes, making sure you know where maybe ropes that you require, tow ropes, chains, different things like that that you might need quickly, that they're available. And that, there's a kind of a chain of command there, that not everybody is going in welding, that there's a person there that's responsible, that people that are doing these jobs know how to do them correctly, and that there's a kind of a plan in place or a procedure where if something is broken, that it's fixed this way, and that it's overseen by someone that's competent in doing it. That manuals are available, as you said, Michael. Machines are very complicated now, and that there's manuals available. And if the job is too big, that people are hired in to do these jobs, that you're not taking on work that's maybe beyond your capacity or beyond the capacity of the equipment that you have in the workshop. So, like in small things. The other thing that I'd like to say also is that tires, changing wheels, inflating tires have caused accidents and fatalities on farms. So it's important to have the right equipment there. And it's important to use it correctly, staying out of the danger zone when you're inflating large tires, and making sure you have the right equipment for fitting large tires on those large machines that you mentioned. Wheels can be very, very, very heavy, and if they move or shift, it's very easy to get crushed.
I think that's probably a very valid point, considering the age profile of tillage farmers. That tends to be, a huge proportion are maybe the wrong side of 55, as they say. But things get that little bit more difficult as you get that little bit older. But I think, Francis, there's good news in that there's TAMS grants available for some of those safety equipment that people can apply for the grant, that likes of changing tires safely and those kind of things. So I think that's probably always worth considering within that conversation as well. Francis,
yes, Michael,
finally, I just wanted to kind of cover, I suppose, maybe more a long-term health and safety bit, which is to do with dust and spores. Certainly over the harvest, we're going to have a lot of dusty crops out there, as we normally would every year. How dangerous is that dust around harvest, or is there more dangerous contaminants or dust that farmers should be considering throughout the year?
Yes, Michael. Well, definitely, all dust and all spores is dangerous. Obviously, when the crops are being harvested or baled, the dust that's coming directly from those machines, you can have an irritant effect, and it can cause damage to your lungs. So it is important to make sure that you're wearing protective, masks when you're kind of doing jobs like fixing machines, cleaning them down, making sure that they're clean. Anything that's going to have dust involved, it's important to put a barrier there to make sure you're not letting that down into your lungs. But the bigger one is the spores, the dust and spores on maybe mouldy grain during the year. And, farmers have developed farmer's lung and COPD from that spore. So that spore can cause an irritant effect, and it can have long-term chronic, debilitating effects in relation to your lungs being damaged. So it is important to be aware of it and wear those masks and put separations in place to avoid the exposure to those dusts and spores.
Okay, thanks, Francis. Just one final thing, and I suppose it's not totally specific to this year, but there's certainly problems out there for farmers in terms of the drought. It certainly looks like a relatively poor harvest for quite a lot of guys, not being saved necessarily by better prices, even though they might have lower grain. It looks like there's lower prices and lower grain yields coming this year. Obviously, putting a lot of people under mental stress, I suppose, because they have a lot of commitments, and this is probably exerting pressure on those. Where or what sort of help might be available to somebody, or what advice maybe would you give to somebody listening in today who might be just really feeling the pressure of that coming down on at the moment?
Well, I suppose I'd like to use the opportunity maybe to look at it from the other perspective in relation to, yes, those issues are taking place on tillage farms, but I'd like to maybe encourage the farmers that are out there that would like to take up the phone and ring their friends, their other tillage farmer colleagues, and have conversations. They mightn't be feeling the pressure themselves, but other farmers might be feeling the pressure, and those phone calls can have a big positive effect on mental well-being. So talking to each other, so the farmers ringing each other, talking to each other, trying to get to those discussion groups if you're involved in them, because you will be able to share ideas there and share the issue, I suppose, of trying to deal with these problems on the ground. And also, obviously, your advisor, your tillage Teagasc advisor, is there to trace through the problems and see what can be done and how things can be managed. And the main thing to remember, I suppose, is that most farmers are dealing with these problems collectively, and it is something that you need to keep that in the back of your mind. So they're the main coping strategies. And when you're talking to your advisor and you're dealing with those problems or discussing those problems, they'll be able to help you kind of work through them and find solutions.
Look, Francis, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for your time for chatting about those particular areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
That's it for the Tillage Edge this week, and my thanks to Francis for joining me on the podcast. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more farming information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.